Phil Steele, welcome back to Tuscaloosa. A very excited Tuscaloosa as we lead off this college football season. I hope you're well, my friend.
I am doing great. How about yourself, Ryan?
Oh, I cannot explain. I was telling the audience a couple of minutes ago, the energy in this town, Phil, as you know, Clemson was not kind to Alabama. California, Santa Clara, California was not kind to Alabama. That set up for a very long offseason. It has been one of the longest off seasons I can remember when you get beat by 28.
Yeah, and I think, it's probably for Coach Saban, it makes things a lot easier. I believe going into the offseason last year, not the offseason, but the postseason last year, all the talk around college football was, is this the greatest team of all time? Maybe that got a little away from Alabama last year, and I think after the drubbing that they took in that game, it's got to be an easy motivating factor for Coach Saban this year.
All right, let me ask you, as you're sitting there making your prediction, and we hold the magazine right here in our studio, it's something that I reference every single day. But I may ask you, when you talk about trying to factor in the talent level, but also combining that with a possible sense of anger and a sense of trying to prove everybody wrong in Tuscaloosa, how do you combine that with your prediction?
Well, it's be honest with you, Ryan, when it came down to the final thing, naturally I've got 1 and 2 are Clemson and Alabama, and I figured that when you look at Clemson, they're going to open up the season AP number 1. They're probably going to blow out every opponent this year. They'll be at least a 17-point favorite in every game. That means they enter the postseason, they're number 1 team in the country, and they'll be favored to win it all. But I went with Alabama to win it, and part of it was that revenge factor, that anger, the fact that I think they'll enter the postseason in a much better frame of mind because Coach Saban's not going to have to calm this team down. He's going to have to try to hold them back. They want to get a little bit of vengeance. And, the ironic thing is these two teams have met 4 times in the last 4 years. The number 1 ranked team has actually lost all 4 meetings. So this will be a game where I believe Clemson will be number 1 coming in, and I think Alabama gets the revenge. The chip on their shoulder is going to definitely be there.
Well, when you look at Clemson, let's say, because we think that they'll probably start in that college football, and they'll probably have a great chance of being undefeated. Do you see the committee or someone, because I think you understand what it takes to go in, because you're an analytic guy, you love the stats, your information and your guide is top-notch, it's second to nobody when you talk about the analytic work. When you're trying to project who is the better team, I mean, what separates these two, if anything at all, other than that sense of anger when we talk about talent level?
I think when you take a look at the 2 offenses, Ryan, almost dead even. You'd almost give the slightest of edges maybe to Clemson, but it's tight, very close. Defensively, I'm going to give a slight edge to Alabama. I think last year Bama had 3 returning starters on D. This year they have 6. It's a more veteran defense than what they had. And last year Clemson had an amazing defensive line, by far the best in the country. They lose 3 first-round draft picks and a third-round draft pick off that D-line. They still have my number 5 rated D-line. They're still very good on defense, but I'm going to give Bama the edge there. Special teams, I'm going to give the edge to Alabama once again. So slight edge on defense, edge on special teams, and then that revenge factor, that chip on their shoulder from that blowout loss. Add it all up, that's the reason I went with Alabama number 1. And I do think Clemson deserves to be number 1 heading into the season. They deserve to be number 1 until they actually lose a game. And I don't think they lose a game until probably the championship.
What are you expecting for this Duke game? The expert?
I do think it will be over fairly early. Now, I don't see Alabama rolling it up in the fourth quarter for 2 reasons. Tua doesn't have Jalen Hurts behind him at quarterback anymore, so I think it might be a lot like last year where he's out of the game sitting on the bench in the fourth quarter. And also, Coach Saban is a fan of Cutcliffe, and, I think when you look at Cutcliffe, he's not going to try to roll the score up on him. So I think Bama at the end of the third quarter, at the half, they're up pretty comfortably, and then maybe relax a little bit in the fourth quarter. But I've got Bama winning that one by right around that 5-touchdown spread.
Phil, when you look at, we're talking to Phil Steele, National College Football Analyst, philsteele.com. We're going to talk about the YouTube page and what you guys are doing at Phil Steele and ESPN Plus and Behind the Wall there, all the great stuff that you guys will continue to project. It's such a valuable tool as this time of the year as we look ahead to the start of college football, really getting in week number 1, getting past week number 0. Who's playing with Alabama Clemson? Who do you like as you go back to that number 3 team in college football? Who's somebody that you're keeping a close eye that maybe can be a part of the conversation in November?
Well, clearly you have to put Georgia in the equation. I feel that this year's Georgia team is even better than last year's Georgia team. They've got Fromm at QB. They've got DeAndre Swift at running back. They got my number 2 rated offensive line in the country and an improved defense. And let's keep in mind the last 2 years when Georgia's played Alabama, they've trailed in those games by a combined 1 minute and 4 seconds. So they could easily have 2 wins over Alabama in the last 2 years. They're an even better team. I think that's going to be a heck of an SEC championship game. I still think Alabama's a better team. And remember last year, Alabama could probably have afforded a loss in the SEC championship game and still made the playoff. They were that far ahead of where everybody else was. And I think this year's SEC championship game would not see Alabama on that level. But I think Georgia's clearly a threat, and I've got Georgia making the playoff this year. And then the other team, now I'll tell you this, there's been a lot of people jumping up and screaming Michigan the last couple of years, Ryan. I haven't been one of them. The last 11 straight years I've picked Ohio State higher than Michigan, and I've been right in 10 of those 11 years. And this year when I look at it, though, I think this is the year for Jim Harbaugh. It's the first time I've been calling for it. And I like their defense always under Don Brown. I know they finished the season abysmally last year, but I think that's going to be much like the Alabama factor with that loss to Clemson. I think that's going to be a motivation. You're going to see a nasty Don Brown defense this year. And offensively, they bring in a guy that Alabama fans are familiar with now in Josh Gaddis, who was there last year on the offense. He's now the offense coordinator of Michigan, bringing in the spread offense. I think it's a perfect fit for Shea Patterson. They go 4 deep at quarterback, so Shea Patterson is going to be running the football. Something happens to him, they can go to McCaffrey. Something happens to him, then they go right down the line. They've got Joe Milton. They've got Cade McNamara, so they're fine there. I think you're going to see a more explosive Michigan offense, one that takes advantage of all the speed they have at receiver. They've got 4 guys on the offensive line that are all-American candidates in my mind. And were all Big Ten in one way or another last year. And Ruiz, and Wenyu, Bredeson, and Runyon. And then you look at the special teams. They have a top 10 special teams as well. Their toughest 3 opponents are Notre Dame, Michigan State, Ohio State, to get them all at home in Ann Arbor. This is finally the year I'm calling for Michigan to not only top Ohio State, but win the Big Ten and run the table this year.
Phil, as you've talked about before on this program, and we always enjoy your analysis and your insight, when you look at the Auburn Tigers, one of the toughest schedules in all of college football, where do you see this Tiger team as we travel throughout 2019?
Yeah, that's the key. I mean, if you look at my power poll in the front of the magazine, I've got them a top 10 team, even with breaking in a new quarterback, a true freshman in Bo Nix. I'm happy to see that Malzahn's taking the offense back over. I'm happy to see he's got mobile quarterbacks for once. I think that's when Auburn's offense runs the best. So Bo Nix there, Joey Gatewood, a very capable backup. You look at the running back core, one of the best in the country. You look at the offensive line, they're going to be one of the best units in the country. Having the number 5 rated offensive line, and defensively, that is a nasty defensive front. Derek Brown surprised me by coming back. He would have been a first-round draft pick. You team him with Nick Coe and Marlon Davidson. I've got my number 2 rated defensive line in the country. That secondary is solid, and they're solid on special teams. Once again, my number 3 special teams. But that schedule's the key. And I think as I've rated the second toughest schedule in the country, road games against Texas A&M, Florida, and LSU, home games against Georgia and Alabama. They're actually right now in Vegas an underdog in all 5 of those games I just mentioned, and only a slight favorite in the opener against Oregon. I think it's a grueling schedule, one that's going to be tough to overcome. But I'll say this. You know, last year I looked at LSU, and LSU was an inexperienced team taking on a grueling schedule. I said they could be an underdog in 5 or 6 games. They turned out to be an underdog in 5 games last year, but did finish with double-digit wins. And one of their losses came in 7 overtimes against Texas A&M. But if A&M or if Auburn overcomes that schedule, they clearly will be one of the higher-ranked teams in the country.
So, do you think Oregon is a true test?
Oregon in the opener?
Yes. For the Tigers.
Yeah, absolutely. Oregon's a test. Oregon. Now, I talked about the Auburn having my number 2 rated defensive line in the country. They're taking on my number 1 rated offensive line in the country. They lead the nation in career starts, and I'm a member of the Joe Moore Award Committee. And I can tell you, at midseason last year, these guys were calling Oregon the most physical offensive line in the country at that point. They lost a couple key guys to injury, and it tallied off a little bit down the stretch, but everybody's pretty much back this year. They've got Justin Herbert, who could be the first quarterback taken in next year's draft. It's between him and Tua for that level. They've got a guy that Alabama fans, I think, are familiar with Kayvon Thibodeau coming in on the defensive line, the number 1 rated defensive lineman out of high school. He joins in with Jordan Scott up front. They've got Dye at linebacker. They've got 2 exceptional cover cornerbacks as well. It's a very good Oregon team, and I think that's going to be a heck of a game in the opener.
Phil, as we go to Oklahoma, just for their final comment, as we talking to Phil Steele here, Phil, when you look at Jalen Hurts, there's been a lot of concerns coming out of Norman about accuracy, and can he take over what happened with Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray? Can Jalen Hurts be that next Lincoln Riley quarterback option, or does this offense they lost their offensive line, as you kind of update us on that, but I mean, losing 4 out of the 5 on the offensive line, but what do you expect from that Oklahoma offense?
Yeah, to me, that's going to be the key is the offensive line, because this spring when I talked to Lincoln Riley and was going over the team with him, he said that's the type of offensive line that might come around once every 20 years. So that was exceptional. But I'll say this as well. Last year, with their quarterback coming in was Kyler Murray. Now, they had used Murray as a running quarterback the previous year, and Murray was known more for his mobility than he was his passing ability. And I said all summer long last year, Ryan, that, one thing I was highly confident on, Kyler Murray's going to be a good quarterback, but let's face it, he's not going to match Baker Mayfield's stats. Baker Mayfield won the Heisman Trophy, for crying out loud. Well, guess what? He surpassed those stats. So I'm not ready to say that Jalen Hurts can't do the same thing this year. I mean, he had over 70% of his passes with the Tide. I thought he was an improved throwing quarterback last year. This offense gives you wide open receivers at times. I think he'll be able to find them, and his running ability is going to be a dangerous addition. So as long as that offensive line can mature quickly, then I think Jalen Hurts can have a big year and be a finalist in New York.
Hey, Phil, take a couple of seconds here and talk about the YouTube channel. Talk about Phil Steele Plus. I know as you guys celebrate this wonderful anniversary, and someone who has been spitting out college football information, and someone that does a 4-hour show in Tuscaloosa, it's a resource that I feel like that I cannot do a show with an arm's reach of my magazine. I bring it in. You make me look smart every single day, but folks want to connect with you on the Twitter account. It's Phil Steele 042. But tell us all the things that you guys are doing on the website, the YouTube channel, and all the different things that you're connected with and trying to get these college football fans engaged.
Well, you're a heck of a guy, Ryan. I appreciate that. That's right. YouTube every Wednesday and Friday this year will be updating it with updates and and that's all free on YouTube, naturally. Just go to philsteele.com, and you'll see it right on the front page of philsteele.com. We also have Phil Steele Plus. Now, if you like the magazine, you'll love Plus because it's an update of the magazine all season long. The numbers are color-coded, red and green, red for bad, green for good. Lets you see at a glance what's going on. That gets you college, NFL, and FCS information. More information on Phil Steele Plus, just go to philsteele.com. And then I also do a weekly newsletter. It's called Inside the Press Box. And if you go to InsideThePressBox.com and use the promo code STEELE, that's STEELE 19, that's STEELE 19, you could take $20 off any Steele season package or get half off this weekend's package. That is STEELE, STEELE 19 at InsideThePressBox.com. And you can pick up on my weekly newsletter. That's going to be available. We're going to send out the first edition tomorrow. The college one goes out. So go to InsideThePressBox.com, type in the promo code STEELE19.
It's like an all-you-can-eat buffet with Phil Steele, with all these different ways of delivering us college football inside information. Phil, as always, we hope we're able to talk very, very soon. Thank you for making us part of your Tuesday here in Tuscaloosa. Thank you, sir. Hope you have a great week.
Always enjoy our conversations, Ryan. Great talking football with you. Have a great week, my friend.